Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the City Council meeting of December the 2nd to order. It is now 8 o'clock. If we could we please start with a Pledge of Allegiance? Would everybody please stand? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you and good evening, everyone. I would like to entertain if there are any motions to address the agenda for the evening. If not, we will move forward. As we see, we do have a quorum present, and we will move forward. As we move forward, I think the first thing on the agenda is those who may want to have anything to say. Do we have anyone signed up to speak on our first agenda item?
Not under citizen participation, sir. That's the first item. There's nobody signed up.
Okay. We have the resolution for R8619. We want to go to the city manager, if we could have a report.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I think that we need to back up a bit, are there any council announcements would be the next thing that you should hit before you get to us. Any announcements from your peers?
Any announcements? No.
And I don't have a manager's report. We have nothing on the consent agenda tonight, and the new business would be no old business, and new business would be R86-19. Joe?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. I'm Joe Minert, the planning director, and R8619 is a request for your approval of a resolution that will adopt some procedures for planning director level variances. The city ordinance currently includes section 2626C, which provides that the planning director may issue a variance in uncontested cases and in cases where variance requests are of a minimal nature, where in the judgment of the planning director, the applicant otherwise would satisfy the criteria for the approval of the variance. And so we've drafted some staff procedures, which are Exhibit A to Resolution 8619. We believe that our residents will greatly benefit by a more expedited process, which avoids actually going to a hearing in cases of a minor nature or where we feel the case is approvable. And we would request that council approve Resolution R8619. And that concludes the staff presentation.
Thank you. I'm open to a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I just had a couple questions of staff.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Minert, thanks for joining us tonight. So what's going on is we're basically going to be giving you the planning director power to make minor changes in requests on personal properties that we deem basically not being important enough to require going through the whole rigmarole with a hearing. But can you define like what is going to be considered insubstantial? Like, is there kind of a category of things you have in mind?
Yes, Councilman Esteve, this is a provision that's already in the ordinance. So when the City Council adopted 0519 earlier this year, you included this provision in that ordinance. And so we're coming to you with the procedures that staff would use in these instances. And basically we're talking about two situations. One, where the request would be considered negligible in its import. So it's what you would call a de minimis case, where there's really only such a fractional deviation from the law, we feel that no one would oppose a case like that, and we would intend to approve it administratively. The second situation is one where staff would otherwise be able to approve the application, but what we would do is we would send out a notice to all of the adjoining property owners, as we do today, certified mail. We would post the property with a sign advertising the request and seeking input, and giving people 14 days to respond. And if people would not respond or we didn't hear from anyone, the planning director would then make the findings of fact and draw the conclusion of the case. We would also report any such actions to the council through the council's weekly status report.
I appreciate that. My specific question is, what is de minimis for this intents and purposes?
To some extent, it's a judgment call, but we typically deem things de minimis when they're, say, 1% of lot coverage, if it was a lot coverage variance or less,
Okay.
or, 6 inches into, when you're talking about a side yard, for example.
Okay.
Things like that, where they are essentially non-issues.
Gotcha. So we have a sense of like very specific numbers in mind. Okay, cool. That's all I needed to know.
We don't have a hard and fast parameter, although
Sure.
perhaps if council has that in mind, they could give staff direction on that.
Okay. That's something that we would probably want to have some follow-up conversations with if we wanted to get that granular. Otherwise, I'm very open to the process. This will ease things for property owners who are just trying to make minor changes. It's something that I know some of my colleagues and I have been interested in for a while, so I'm otherwise very pleased with this change. So, thank you, Mr. Meinert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Staff, I want to thank you for your persistence in this. This has been a long time coming, and I think it'll be a great benefit to the community, because it makes these minor issues, particularly with fences, a lot more bearable for our constituents. So thank you very much for pursuing. I think we first started on this journey back in 2015. So thanks for your continued pursuit of this. This will be great for folks that need to get those minor adjustments made. Thank you.
Comments? Okay, I think I would entertain a motion right now to approve.
I'd like to make a motion to approve, sir.
Seconded.
It's been moved and properly second. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? It has been moved, properly second, and voted on and approved.
Sorry, next we have the Dale Golf Course Redevelopment Preliminary Plan 4-19005. Mr. Rivera, if you take your team up and make... Okay, go ahead.
Good evening, Mayor. Again, Joe Meinert, Planning Director. I wanted to introduce this item. This project is a project that involves the redevelopment of the Glendale Golf Course, and that property does have frontage on Hillmead Road. Hillmead Road is just it's on the western edge of the Bowie planning area and just south of the city of Bowie corporate limits at Quick Fox Lane. And this is a property that has gone through a lot of history, a lot of zoning history. It's technically outside of the Bowie planning area. It's in the Glendale planning area. And a lot of effort has been made by Prince George's County to look at the zoning status of the property and set it up for redevelopment. There was a sector plan done, which is a small master plan, small area master plan. Several years ago, the city did not really participate in that, but we monitored the progress of it. And then more recently, there was a minor plan amendment that set the stage for the type of development that's proposed tonight. Essentially, that minor plan amendment set up a development plan that would involve zoning densities of RR, which is a half unit per acre on the property. And so there have been a lot of community meetings held by the Park and Planning Commission, by the County Council, by the Planning Board, to get the zoning status of this property set. And what you have before you tonight is an informational presentation by the developer. They're going to provide you with information about how they're going to go about developing the property, and then it's really a question of council as to whether you want to engage any further as the project moves through the process. Again, it's outside the planning area of Bowie, it's nearby, and it is of some interest to our residents. And also, by way of note, in 2003, there was a similar proposal to develop our densities on this property by another developer. At that time, the golf course looked like it was going out of business, and a developer came in and presented a preliminary plan of subdivision. And at that time, City Council voted to disapprove the preliminary plan, basically because of the impacts on traffic and on schools. And we discussed in the staff report that we provided to you for tonight's meeting the fact that the applicant did submit a new traffic study which shows that with some improvements at the intersection of Maryland 564 and 193, that they would meet the county's level service test for traffic. And also, I've included information about the school cluster situation. And as you know, the county does their school analysis based on the larger cluster boundary, which includes multiple schools. And so they look at the capacity every year during the budget process. So it's not a step where you can hold a development up because of the school situation. Also, developers are required to pay a fee of over $16,000 per residential dwelling unit to the school system to offset impacts to the schools. And so that will take place here as the project moves into the building permit stage. So we wanted to provide this information to you for your information, your background, and really seeking guidance as to whether council wants to weigh in on the new preliminary plan that's proposed, or whether you prefer to just allow the project to proceed according to the zoning that they have. And that would conclude the staff presentation. We have with us Mr. Norman Rivera, who is the representative of the developer.
I would like to ask you one thing to make sure everyone is clear. The golf course has gone defunct at this point, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
First time in here speaking. Good evening, everybody. My name is Norman Rivera. I'm the attorney of record for this property, formerly known as the Glendale Golf Course. Unfortunately, golf as a business in this area, this county, across the country has suffered hard times. There's many golf courses here in Prince George's County have gone defunct, and this is one of them, unfortunately. But we've been working with John Shields, the owner, the former owner rather, and we bought the property in September. But first, congratulations on your election, re-election. Congrats to the Ravens and all the other sports teams, Mystics, Caps, Nats. So it's been a great couple years. But we're here to present you what our schematic is of the subdivision plan that Joe just presented, and he summarized everything eloquently. So Councilman Todd Turner asked us to do a sector plan amendment so that we could outreach to the community. We had several meetings with the Glendale Citizens Association. We met with people that live right around the course, and we meet with people all the time when they call us. So what you have before you on the top left is the rendering of the subdivision plan. It is now being in process with Park and Planning. So it's 4-19005. It'll go to a planning board hearing sometime in January. The city will get a referral, an official referral from Park and Planning, to which your staff and the city can opine upon, and then it goes to the hearing. But meanwhile, the county and the state go through their, obviously, the reviews for traffic and schools. And as Joe said, we meet the school test, we meet the traffic test, and on the right there, you see the existing situation, all the 18 holes, and on the bottom, we have different views of Prospect Hill Road. On the far right is Old Prospect Hill Road. So what we've done is try to maintain the bucolic nature, because everybody's used to seeing a lot of open space. So those fences there, you see the white picket fences, they were torn down, we're replacing those. So when you drive by the site, you're not going to see much different, except there won't be a golf course, but there'll be houses set back far deep into the site. So as you can see on the far left, top left, you see setbacks along Prospect Hill Road. Old Prospect Hill Road will not have an access point. The only access points will be on the far left of the drawing, directly across the street from the newer development on Prospect Hill Road, The other access point would be on Hillmead Road, which is probably the closest point to the city of Bowie. So we're here tonight to just to show you our plans, get your input. It's a continuing process. After the planning board hears the subdivision plan, they will hear a detailed site plan, where we bring before you and the rest of the community our architecture for all the builders. So there'll be single-family homes, 209. There'll be 63 townhouses or quads. On the top left, where it's hard to describe what that is, but to the left of Hillmead Road on that top left corner will be townhouses and/or quads, reflecting the R18C zone. But the rest of it and the whole property will be developed at RR zone densities, which is what the whole community is zoned right now, is RR, half-acre lot density. So that's commensurate with what the county council approved, what the sector plan approved, what the legislation allows, and what the code allows. And we're just here for any questions.
Okay, I have a couple of questions for you, and
Yes,
bear
sir.
with me. The first is you talked about you've been able to hold several meetings with the community. How did that
Yes.
go?
Very well. It's the first time that I've been to a community meeting where they clapped instead of throwing tomatoes. So we work closely with the Glendale Citizens Association. Henry Wixon and his whole association, we went to them numerous times, refining the plan over and over again, because there are people with certain sensitivities all around the property. So we wanted to make sure we had open space. 53 acres of the whole 125 acres is open space. Lots of trees saved, a lot of open space. It's not high density. So we were happy to report that all those meetings went very well.
Okay. One other question I have is,
Yes, sir.
when we look at the school system, and knowing that you may not have the exact answer to this, but I was looking at the information, and we talked about High Bridge Elementary is 101%, Whitehall Elementary is at 168% utilization capacity. Glendale Elementary, though it isn't in Cluster 4, is at 144%. Just in general, what do you see being the approach to addressing the overcrowding in the schools, particularly on the elementary side? And we're not even talking about the high schools.
Yeah, and you hit it right on the head, sir, because the elementary is where the rubber hits the road. So right in the past, the county had a test of capacity. So if you didn't meet capacity, you had to do certain things. But then it became apparent that the county needed money to add more schools. So hence the county and the state have embarked on this P3 effort to build a lot of new schools, 27, 2 high schools, certain amount of middle schools, elementary schools. So the county evolved from a strict test of, if you're right here and all these schools are right here, what are their capacities? So it became too cumbersome, so they said it'd be better if we did the test so you know what's happening, but then there's a surcharge, as Joe said, of $16,000 plus per unit that goes to the general fund, and then we have to leave it up to the governing bodies, the Board of Education, the county council, and the county executive to allocate where that money goes to put the dollars into sticks and bricks to serve the neighborhood that the development is in. So that's essentially, in a nutshell, how it works at this moment.
So the 16K is what's going to be used to offset however we're going to place the kids that will be coming in from the new development.
Right, so the Board of Ed has the people accounting section. So they're like looking at, like, we have 80 kids here, there. So they have an analysis, and then they give that to the Board of Ed, the county executive, and they have to allocate based on priorities where they want that money to be spent. So once we write the check, it goes to the general fund. It's up to you as the city to influence that process to make sure it happens right here.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple questions for you. Again, thank you for coming out today. And I understand that we're in an informational stage here.
Sure.
But still have a couple questions for you. It looks like in 2003, the City Council voted to disapprove the preliminary plan because of traffic, citing traffic as one of the issues. Can you talk about how, since 2003, you guys have worked to alleviate that plan?
Yes, sir. So we did a traffic study that your staff has in their possession, which, according to the APF, Adequate Public Facility Guidelines by Park and Planning, we have to analyze traffic. My traffic engineer is here, and we also consult with State Highway because we're right on 193 and we impact 564. So for example, at 564, we have to add left if you're going north on 564 to make a left on 193. If you're coming down 564, you want to make a left on 193, we have to add those lanes. So we're doing off-site traffic improvements there. We're looking at our entrance at Prospect Hill. We have to make improvements if necessary right at our entrances at Hillmead and Prospect Hill Road. And whatever the county sees fit to make us do, we will do it. So our traffic studies indicate that we pass all the tests, but we have to do a couple of improvements.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mayor, you spoke a little bit about stakeholder meetings. How many are we talking about? It sounds like you just worked with one group individually, but
Well,
can you explain a little bit more
in
about
rough
the process?
numbers, I'd say 40 to 50. We would meet at the Glendale Golf Course early on, because when I was working with Mr. Shields, he had to go out to the community and say, hey, I got to sell the golf course. We're losing money left and right. What do you all think? So we did all those meetings.
Yeah.
And then Councilman Turner said, well, let's get a bigger view. So he did the sector plan amendment, which included all the property around us. And there were several public hearings that the county council and the planning board had, and those folks had meetings. And then there was a legislative amendment to the code that allowed us to file the plans that we have in process now. So I would say 40 to 50 meetings. Okay. And people call us all the time, like somebody just called, my house is right on Prospect Hill Court. How close are the, how close are the nearest house to my house? So we just go out, we take a snapshot, we send them by email a site plan or deliver it to them and show them what we're doing.
This question's for city staff, just for a point of clarification. Since 2003, Joe, have we had any actual involvement in this?
Not directly. We've just monitored the activities of the county through the zoning process, and as the different legislative actions have come through, we kind of monitored the bills, but the city council has not taken any position since then.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
So I've got a couple questions in terms of the school analysis that you talked about. So you said that a school analysis has been done and basically deemed that there was adequate space for to support new development. And as Mr. Mayor pointed out, we are overcrowded with the elementary schools. Can you talk a little bit more to actually what that analysis is, and if you participated in that analysis, were you privy to that information?
We really don't participate in that. We give them the raw data. They take that, put it into an equation, they balance it amongst the whole county, and then they do their analysis. So that's why they decided a few years ago that it'd be better for us to give the money per unit so that they can take that, aggregate that, to allocate it in the capital fund to figure out where to build schools or to put it into operating money to add teachers and so forth.
And when you said they, could you clarify who they is?
The Board of Ed, the county exec, and the county council.
Okay, because to my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, there are 14 new schools that are coming, and not one of them was given to Bowie, and precisely. So how is it that, if it's pretty clear on the elementary side that we don't have the infrastructure at these elementary schools to support this new growth, how do you plan on working with us and the county to basically alleviate that if one of the schools are not coming to Bowie?
Well, we're really not part of that decision-making tree. So we are told that this is our impact. There's an analysis of there's 2 kids for a single-family house or a half a kid for an apartment. They develop the fee, we give the money, and then they allocate it. So we're not part of that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just following up a little bit on our schools question. So just to be clear, when the $16,000 per unit impact fee is paid, Mr. Meinert, my understanding is that goes to the county's general fund. Is that correct? It doesn't necessarily, it's not lockboxed for any particular program as far as I know, right?
My understanding is that it was set for school facility impacts. do not believe it's just going directly into the general fund.
No, okay. Because I mean, it's one of those things where like, yeah, casino money's going to schools, this pot of money's going to schools, and then it turns out it's going into a general fund or it's getting rated for something else. Because that kind of gets to the heart of the issue is that, you know, you guys, on the developer end, you guys pay a ton of money in property taxes, you pay these impact fees.
Yes.
But then that money ends up getting sucked into programs, and on our end, we don't actually see where it goes. Like Bowie High's decades behind in getting any major improvements made. Last conversation I had with the county, we're 20 years away from a new second high school. You know, we got elementary schools that have got all sorts of challenges. So, you know, from our perspective over here, you know, we're also frustrated. You guys are paying a lot of money, but we're not seeing it on our end, and that's really, I think, where a lot of the frustration with this process is, purely on our part.
You did get a library. And
Sure, absolutely. So you guys are not connecting to Prospect Hill Road with this project?
to the current Prospect Hill Road. Old Prospect Hill Road, which is to the far right where that picket fence is, the two shots to the left are our current Prospect Hill Road. We're closing the current entrance to the golf course.
Gotcha.
Because it goes up that hill, you have to make that hard left. So that'll be like a model court. So we're aligning our new entrance where it says view on the top left, because that's directly across the entrance to that other subdivision. Because Public Works and DPI, they don't want dogleg intersections. They want you to be opposite another road.
Gotcha. So you're connecting to that, to the High Bridge Road portion there on the north, is what you're saying?
Yeah, on Hillmead to the north, where
and
that
then,
point
or
is.
Hillmead Road, and then you're closing the current access point
Right, on the
from,
bottom in the middle,
Okay.
you see that gray area, that's like the parking
Yeah.
lot and all that. So the current entrance, the new entrance would be to the left where that subdivision is, to just, I guess that's north of Reed Temple.
okay.
Like kind of an upside down floor there.
Can you discuss any, or go into more depth on already done or planned road improvements for those sections of road?
Well, it's up to Public Works and the county to tell us what they want to do. So there are some folks who like the bucolic nature like you see in the photos, because from a road capacity standpoint, we don't need to widen it. There's enough pavement there to get the traffic in and out. So under some county code, you could build that to an urban section. But then you would lose the trees, you lose the country look. We'd prefer to have it kind of like the way it is and do other improvements, you know, elsewhere that the county sees fit.
Gotcha. So as a part of those conversations, Prospect Hill Road itself is a bit of a nightmare, and we've been talking to our friends in the county for a while about just trying to get a little bit of repaving done, because that area is awful. So to the extent that you're privy to any of those
That
conversations?
is exactly what we're trying to do.
All right, there you go.
Fix that section. It needs what they call a mill and overlay or
Well,
something.
you have found a popular cause then. Keep talking about it.
Because there are potholes and all that stuff.
Fair enough. You've had a lot of meetings. You've described 40 or 50 meetings that have taken place, and that's also sometimes a frustrating thing, both from the developer end and from our end, because the developer has to spend a lot of time and money on lawyers attending all those meetings, but then like the actual public feedback that happens is so limited, it ends up not helping anybody. I don't mind saying that out loud. And you've spoken specifically to the Glendale Citizens Association. I think they've been the main citizens association you've been able to talk to. Have you had any conversations with the Northridge residents at all, who are actually in the city of Bowie?
Unless they're part of that overall group, I can't say that I did.
Okay, because I'm seeing a lot of folks in the audience who look like they're seeing this for the first time, so that's going to be another thing. Final thing, I've gotten a general feel of kind of what you're planning on building, the numbers of units and so on, and I have kind of an idea what the expected home values are, but I'm curious in your own words, what are the expected values of the properties you're looking to build here, in your single-family homes as well as your condos?
So there'll be a range of singles. So the singles, which is the majority of the project, 209, what we do is we have different lot widths. So that dictates how big the house can be, the lot width and the depth.
Sure.
So you want to segment the market. So we're talking to 3 or 4 builders. So they'll have, you know, the $500,000 to 600 to 700, and then plus options. They easily go into the millions. On the top far left, those are going to be towns and/or quads. Those will be 3 to 4 to 5, because there are a lot of folks now, like Stanley Martin, for example, by the Whole Foods on Route 1, just sold a $750,000 townhouse in University Park. So the sky's the limit, but it'll take us a year and a half, 2 years to get to where we market it.
Okay. So just to be clear, in the smaller lots, you're talking about $300,000, $400,000, and $500,000 properties, and the larger lots, you're talking about properties potentially in the seven figures?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. All right, we'll follow up on that later. That's pretty much all that I had. Our main thing is just the school capacity issue is going to be something that we continue to talk about a lot. We have a very new city council, and this is priority number 1, 2, and 3 for us, at least for me, and I think probably for some of my colleagues. I don't want to talk too much on their behalf. And as well as road improvements to the immediate area, and just making sure that this is the kind of neighborhood that ends up contributing to the community and not obviously diminishing from it in any way. Appreciate your time tonight.
Definitely.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple questions for you as well. I'll start on the schools part more than anything that's commentary, because I think you've fairly reflected what the kind of resolution to that is, which is there is no resolution, which is developers come in, they have a $16,000 get out of jail free card, if you will, which is not cheap, certainly. But it's money that goes into the school system, but in no way, shape, or form is it guaranteed to come back to the community which has been affected by the development.
And that's out of our hands. We also pay a public safety fee,
Yep.
which is almost as much for police and fire.
Yeah. So it's, yeah, and that's unfortunate, because my constituents, one of the biggest concerns is, what does it mean in terms of my schools? And there's no relief in sight when you start looking at our schools. They come back, they're either overcrowded or they're close enough that they should be, and people really, frankly, aren't that pleased with that. So that's, problem number one. You're left with a get out of jail free card. However, that leaves us in a position where we're not enthused about having a developer come in when they're putting a burden on that cannot be remediated, regardless of what your intentions might be. The roads and the traffic continue to be an issue for this. I'm glad that there's going to be some improvements. I'm not sure it will be enough, and certainly it adds to the aggregate for overall traffic in the area. One of the questions I had for you specifically is, what were the legislative amendments that you needed from the council, from the county?
So the East Glendale Sector Plan Amendment, which is an amendment of the 2006 Glendale Lanham Seabrook Master Plan effort, which then had another amendment. This was an amendment to the amendment, I believe, or maybe it was the second one. But it was specifically tasked to decide what to do with all this open space. So in the first amendment, or the first sector plan, parts of the property were rezoned R18C, which could be high-rise condominium. So in the upper left-hand side of both the top pictures, that is R18C property that could be that. And now on the bottom right, sort of towards 193, that's also R18C. The middle part, the golf course, was downzoned to OS. What the sector plan said was, at the end of the day, that 5-acre lots aren't really what should be here in terms of smart planning and growth. So the end result was that the county council saw fit to say, put it back to what it was, which was RR, half-acre lots. So up until '06, it was that. Everything around it is RR. So it basically set the table to say that that area should be at that density. CB 9718 was passed that allowed a property in the OS zone to be developed at RR densities through a subdivision plan and a site plan, and that was the legislative amendment.
So originally it was open space,
Originally it was RR.
the entire area, and it was being used under RR for golf purposes?
Correct.
Okay. So was there a special use for that, or was it just?
Now, I mean, you can do a farm, you can do golf, a lot of recreational uses, or your standard single-family house in RR.
So then it went from RR to
OS.
OS with R18C, and now it's R18C with RR.
Yes.
So over the course of that significantly improved the number of units you could put in there, correct?
Not over what it used to be in '06. The R18C was an additional density, but that was what that was approved. So that is not our property.
So what were you originally?
Actually, part of our property is R18C, the top left where the towns and quads are. So we're basically designing to what the zone is.
Okay. All right, well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilwoman, you have another question?
I don't think I fully understand the education piece, so I'm going to ask another question around that.
Okay.
So you're paying, or the developers are contributing over $16K per dwelling unit for going towards education, is that correct? That's correct,
So
right?
272 times that.
Okay. And so it's kind, maybe I'm not understanding, but it's kind of apparent that that doesn't look to be coming back to Bowie per se, because there aren't schools being created. So what I'm trying to understand is how do you plan on working with us? Because it seems like this is kind of like a never-ending thing that we might keep coming back to, because the situation isn't getting solved in the sense of trying to develop more homes, but there isn't the education to support that. So how do you plan on working with us as City Council to make sure that that is actually going towards Bowie, or in the form of, will that be, you helping us lobby for that, or what does that look like? Like, how do you plan on working with us to get that done? Because it seems like it's not happening.
I mean, I can certainly help lobby the effort, but this happens all over the county. I know that's not a great answer, but the mayor, your city council's got a lot of weight in the county. So
Right.
between the city, the state, and the county officials, those are the people that allocate the funds. So we are simply, feeding that, but we don't have a whole lot of control where it goes.
Right. I understand what you're saying, and maybe perhaps because I'm not, I guess you would say I don't have a career in this type of lifestyle to, maybe just say, okay, but that doesn't seem to be in the most way acceptable, in the sense of you're contributing $16,000 towards education. It doesn't appear to be coming to Bowie, and then the answer is just kind of like, well, that's what happens. So how does that make it acceptable for our residents? That's what I'm just trying to understand.
And I appreciate the sentiment. It's just what we're told to do. It's not a great, I'm not making excuses, but that is the law, and we're following it to the letter. It's, up to the communities to lobby for what they want, and we'd certainly help, because it'd be better for us too. We want you to say, if you live here, you go to X school, everything's fine. We'd be happy to do that. But I can't tell anybody what to do.
Right, I understand, but I think what we need to see, and I'm speaking for myself and my colleagues as well, I think what we need to see from you is a greater effort to help us get that through, because just saying, we're doing what we're told, or this is what's acceptable, that obviously doesn't really work for our residents, and it doesn't really work for the situation, and it isn't helping us. So
Right.
I'd just like to see a greater partnership on that front to make sure that's actually, we're actually moving forward, as opposed to just saying, hey, we're trying to develop, we paid our money, that's it, and that's all.
Well, here's one answer. So this preliminary plan won't go to the planning board until January, and we'll start grading. But no houses get built for at least a year and a half, 2 years. And you don't build 272 right at once. So we would pull like 10 houses, so it goes in increments. So between now and the first house start, where the first payment gets made, we can all work together to talk to everybody in charge to say, hey, we're paying this money. We'd like to keep the community happy. Can you make sure that it goes where it should be? But
Okay.
we'd be happy to do that.
That's
So
what we'd like to
it's
see.
not like that automatically is there, bam. It's going to take 3 years or so for all those houses to be built and sold, maybe 4. So during that whole time period, so that's probably 6 years from now before it's all sold out.
Okay, I appreciate that, as long as we can work
no
together to
problem.
get that done.
I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
I have 2 kids, and I know what happens.
Yeah, awesome, thank you.
Councilman Gardner?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Norman
Yes,
Rivera,
sir.
for coming out this evening, and the developer for presenting this project. It looks as though, you guys have done some work on getting this done. I wanted to just ask you guys, I'm just going to throw out a few things here. Elm Street developer also came in front of Bowie. I'm just going to throw out a couple of developers that have come visited us in the recent years. Elm Street developer, they have a proposed site for 460 single-family homes. South Lake Development, 1,035 dwellings. The airport, which was recently approved for 600 units. Mill Branch, which is a project that was recently brought in front of council, was 300 units. We also have Melford, which is St. John's Properties, of 2,000 plus units. We have Amber Ridge that is looking at coming out in front of us in January 21st for another 200 units. And I'm just roughly off the top of my head, also the Bowie Town Center, there's some residential dwellings in site of another 300 units. And roughly, I'm somewhere these are just the projects that I know of, okay? There are others if you drive along 450 corridor, there are tons of development projects. And my colleagues up here bring up a lot of good points. The impact on the infrastructure. It concerns me who's approving all of these residential projects at the county level and the permits, because they're not taking into consideration of the impact on the schools, the roads, the highways, the hospitals, everything. And, no, pardon me, I didn't say that for an applause, it's just a matter of fact, okay? The average, data shows the year 2018, the average family has 2.5 children. So out of this number, 6,000 units roughly that I covered, we're talking almost a 9,000 increase or impact directly on our schools initially. We already are suffering when it comes to the region as far as education. Prince George's County schools are not ranking favorably. A lot of it has to do with, overcrowded classrooms, overwhelmed teachers, a number of factors are involved here. I understand that developers do make a contribution to our education fund. However, and I understand, and I appreciate you explaining to myself and the audience here that these homes aren't going to come on board all at one time. They're going to be staggered. However, we are still going to be left with these homes. The impact, whether they're staggered, whether they come up a year or 10 years from now, they're all going to be there. So I understand that the developer and the owner of the golf course have come together to look at what's beneficial for the developer and their bottom line and their product or their
But they look at the code first. We
yes,
have to,
and the code allows this.
yes.
But it's not, first, the impact, the negative impact, the population growth, immediate growth is just not good. And then two, we're talking about all of these homes coming on. Have the developers even looked to see if the market would bear it? Could we sell these homes? It's a lot of housing. I know that, we have Amazon and we have a number of different jobs coming coming into the community. However, this here is it is oversaturated. I really like to, coming into my reelection, as everyone know, that I agreed to it because I feel that it was the best thing. We need to slow down this development. Right now, we can't say yes to every project. We have to put the brakes on it because I think if we're a little too hasty, we're going to find ourselves pretty much dealing with a lot of headaches rather than a lot of solutions. And the Glendale project, being that it's not residing in the city of Bowie, the city of Bowie wouldn't collect any residential taxes from this. So we would receive all of the headaches, but not any of the benefits. The headaches being the overcrowded roads, the headaches being the overcrowded classrooms. At this particular time, and I want to say this respectfully because I know you outside of this environment, but I want to say this respectfully to you, Norman, is that I just don't think this is a good project for the residents of Bowie.
There's a whole lot of things you just brought up.
Yeah.
The DMV has a 30,000, 40,000 housing shortage. There's issues of affordable housing, workforce housing. The people that work in the restaurants and the offices. There's a lot of discussions about all that, and it's not tonight.
And
but-
respectfully, those
Yeah.
individuals who are, and I do mean this respectfully, to our servers in restaurants, they're not buying $400,000+ homes.
I didn't say that.
And as a result of it, we have, it's just not, I just don't find it as, and I do mean it respectfully, Norman.
No.
It's
That's
not
a lot of
good
respect in
project.
one night, sir.
Okay, it's just not a good fit. I just don't think.
But the
for this
county
community.
council has a housing task force right now, so they're trying to digest all that.
I
So it's called-
appreciate the hard work that the county council does. However, they've made my job a little bit more difficult in approving a number of projects that we have to deal with here in Bowie.
Oh, yeah.
And
I
I look out into the audience, I see nothing but disappointed faces. And I'm not feeling the sentiments for this project at all. And respectfully, again, I always want to say this, I work for the residents of the city of Bowie, and I have to go along with my residents. And if my residents say, hey, I like it, I may even say, hey, you kind of got to look at this here. It's a little bit of a wear and tear on the system, and we're not getting anything in return to keep that system propped up. So those are my concerns, respectfully.
Totally understand.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to thank you for coming this evening. A couple of comments real quick, and so we can continue to move on with the agenda. First, I'd like to hold you to what you talked about a little earlier.
Sure.
And I'd like all of the developers to commit to that. One of the things we have an issue with is our schools, in particular, overcrowding. You said about working with us to work with our county council in addressing those issues, and we'd like to hold you to that. And so as we move forward, I'd like to make sure that we sit down at some point, we sit down with our county council and talk about the impacts that you see and how we might be able to get through this issue. Because again, it's a negative impact on our community. To the city manager, I would like that we continue to monitor the project, though we don't have any direct input. And Ingrid, did you have any comments?
I just had one thing, Norman. If you could also please be sure to meet with more of the residents in that area. I definitely want to hear more from them and their comments, especially the Northridge residents.
Sure thing.
Thank you.
Glad to do that. And also in terms of the outreach, it's the state and to some degree the federal government, because as you know, the formulas go down to the local level. So we have to bring in a lot of folks to make it happen.
Understood.
But I'll be glad to be part of that.
Okay, great. City manager?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that. We'll keep in mind and we'll monitor all of the progress and report to you and give honest recommendations about all the projects.
All right.
Associated.
Hey, thank you again for coming this evening.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Mr. Mayor, next we have the South Lake detailed site plan. Frank?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. For the record, Frank Stevens of the City Planning Staff, here tonight to review with you detailed site plan 19023 for the South Lake community. This particular site plan is for the construction of 1,035 dwelling units that are broken down in the following manner: 344 detached single-family dwellings, 563 townhouse units, and 128 two-family attached units. It also includes the construction of a 5,300 square foot clubhouse and other recreational amenities on 283 acres of the 382-acre site. The property is zoned EIA, Employment and Institutional Area, and it's located in the southwest quadrant of the interchange of Maryland Route 214 and US Route 301. It'll have access off of Old Central Avenue and 2 access points from southbound US 301. If you look at attachment 1 in our report, there's a location map of the entire South Lake community. However, we're only talking about 3 segments of the residential portion, which are shown more in the wider areas as opposed to the shaded-in areas that are closer to Route 301. Those areas will be the subjects of future detailed site plans. So I've described the location. This property was the subject of an annexation agreement back in 2006, which pledged the city's support for the development of the property. There was a stakeholders meeting held for the South Lake community, and it focused also on DSP 19023 on September 19th, and a memo summarizing that stakeholders meeting is included in our report as attachment 2. We begin the analysis of the detailed site plan on page 3 of our report, which also includes the purposes of detailed site plans that have been established pursuant to the Prince George's County zoning ordinance. Attachment 3 in our report is a map of the hierarchy of the proposed roadway system within the project, and we discuss those roadways on pages 6 and 7 in our report. Attachments 4A through 4F are the elevations of the 2-family attached dwelling units, and it includes the front, the side, and the rear elevations, and those are discussed on pages 6 and 7 of our report. Attachments 4G through 4K are of the proposed recreational complex, the clubhouse, and the associated recreational area. Those features are discussed on pages 7 and 8 of our report, and they include the elevations of the proposed clubhouse. Attachments 5A through 5F show the locations and the types of the other recreational amenities that are proposed. We discussed those on pages 9 and 10 of our report. They include a trail system that's about three-quarters of a mile long, pocket parks, playgrounds, a dog park, open space, open play areas, pocket parks, and things of that nature. Attachment 6 indicates the style, design, and the color of the light poles and fixtures. Those are discussed on page 11 of our report, and those items have been used in many areas of the city in the past. Attachment 7 shows the signs that are proposed as part of this detailed site plan. There are three types that are proposed for identification of the clubhouse and the directional information throughout the neighborhoods that are being reviewed by this DSP. Attachment 8 is a copy of the Stormwater Management Concept Plan, which has been reviewed and approved, and that is discussed on page 12 of our report. And you can see that part of that trail system that I mentioned is around those two stormwater ponds. Attachment 9 is the tree conservation plan. It's discussed on page 12 of our report, and approximately 114 acres of woodlands are not being cleared on the property. Finally, on page 12, we talk about the conformance with the Bowie and vicinity master plan, and that the master plan identifies this property as mixed use. On pages 13 and 14, we offer our recommendation of approval with the conditions that are stated on those pages, and that concludes one other item. That concludes our presentation, but we did receive a memo from a resident, Terry Nurdin of Collington Station, that I believe you have a copy of which expresses her concerns with the project. And at this time, I'd like to call on Mr. Michael Byrd, the chairman of the Bowie Advisory Planning Board, to give a summary of the board's hearing on November 12th. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. For the record, I'm Mike Byrd. I'm the chairman of the Advisory Planning Board for the City of Bowie. On December 12th, we held a public hearing here in the chambers to discuss DSP 19023. There were 4 members of the board that were present, so we did have a quorum. During that meeting, Mr. Frank Stevens gave us a presentation, very detailed presentation, followed by Mr. Arthur Horn, who's representing the applicant, which is South Lake Partners. After their presentations, the board, myself and the board, we had a number of questions that included various things such as number of dwellings, input to city services, or impact to city services, excuse me, the input or impact to the community as a whole, the city as a whole. What was the value of this property or this project? What does it bring to the city itself? And can the market support it? During the public hearing portion of our meeting, there were approximately half a dozen citizens, not nearly as many as there are this evening. It's unfortunate, but it's good. It's good that people are becoming civically engaged and coming out. But so out of those half dozen residents, all were in disapproval of the proposal, and they gave testimony. And in essence, they cited various difficulties with inadequacy of local schools to absorb the influx of new students, the price point of the units themselves, degradation of the green space of the city, et cetera, et cetera. At that point, I closed the public hearing, and then we made a motion, which was made by, although we had 4 members, only 3 actually voted, as one recused himself because of a conflict of interest. The motion was passed to approve as staff recommended, and that vote passed 2-1. Any questions for me?
Yeah, just a point of clarification here. Thank you, Mr. Byrd, and the work you guys do on the Advisory Planning Board. So it's approved, but it looks like you just said that everyone spoke against it who's a resident. Can you explain the rationale there?
So the rationale is this. So our charter on the Advisory Planning Board, we have to go by the ordinances and the guidelines of the master plan, vicinity plan, so on and so forth, as well as the zoning ordinances. So we have to, as a proposal comes before us, we have to look at the proposal from the merits of the proposal itself, as far as if it meets those guidelines or does not meet those guidelines. At which point we can interject some of our opinions and recommendations to either be added as amendments to that proposal, or either we just approve as per staff recommendations. In a lot of cases, the Advisory Planning Board, we do 90% of the time, we go with staff recommendations, our staff here of the city. 10% of the time, we go against that. But again, we interject some of our experience as citizen volunteers, but ultimately, I mean, Mr. Horn, as well as the other developers and the land acquisition lawyers, they do come with a proposal that meets the guidelines and the intent as laid out by the master plan that obviously is approved by the planning board, so on and so forth, and filters down to us. So to just automatically say, no, we cannot approve something, we do not approve something, if it is indeed meets the guidelines and the metrics that are set before us, as per our charter, we have to approve.
So the approval isn't based off of the citizen participation, it's based off of the merits, just to be clear, right?
We take citizen participation, no, that's a very good point, very good question. We do take some citizen participation into, yes, but in essence, it's that citizen participation as well as the merits of the package itself. And I mean, it's discretionary, obviously.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Byrd? Anyone?
You said that, you mentioned that the approval is based off of the metrics. Could you talk about what those actually are?
So again, as I mentioned before, there's certain guidelines, zoning ordinances, so on and so forth, that's promulgated by the county from the planning board that filter down through the city. So those guidelines are the guidelines that developers, anyone who has any kind of project that wants to build within the county has to meet certain criteria, whether it be infrastructure, whether it be the subdivision or the plan of subdivision, preliminary plan of subdivision, whether it be architectural, landscape, so on and so forth. There's guidelines that they have to meet. They meet those guidelines, so that's a check in the box for those areas. Me personally, I think sometimes that we have to, for us on the board, we interject some of our opinion into the process as far as try to make it a little bit more stringent, so to speak. But in essence, as long as those guidelines are met, as per our charter, there really is no rationale for us to disapprove.
Okay, let me ask a follow-up question. It seems that there's a little bit of white space there, and I'm not sure that I understand it. So you mentioned after Councilman Buafo said, so you don't take into consideration the actual concerns of the residents, and you said that you do. So if it meets the guidelines of the charter, but you are taking, like, what percentage of the residents' consideration are you taking in, and the approval of the can you explain that?
Yeah, very good question, councilperson. Yeah, very good question. And again, it's all discretionary.
Whose discretion? Could you explain?
Discretionary of the board, of the board itself, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, discretionary of the board. So the guy, for example, if you are a resident, you want to build a shed on the back of your property.
Right.
All right? You go through the proper protocols and the procedures to build that shed. It meets the guidelines for that shed to be built. But two of your neighbors don't want the shed there because it blocks their line of sight. Those neighbors come in, they speak, hey, we don't want the shed in Councilman Roxy's yard because it blocks our sight line to the street. So you, as the property owner, by right, you have by right authority. You own that property. By right, you can build on that property what you want to build as long as you meet the certain guidelines and recommendations. But if your neighbors don't want them there, don't want that shed there, should the shed not be built?
So in that instance, wouldn't you then take the concerns of the residents back to the county and share with them what they're saying and then revisit the approval?
And a lot of times we do that, yes ma'am.
And did that happen in this case?
Not in this case, no.
Okay, thank you.
Not in this case.
Go ahead, Councilwoman.
Mr. Byrd, thank you for being here. Thank you for answering the questions. My question is, your meetings are open to the public, correct?
Yes.
How are they advertised?
They're advertised, the city puts out an announcement, I believe it's 15 days in advance, as well as follow-on advertisements. They actually list postings in the particular neighborhood as well as postings in the Blade and publications within the community.
If we could we have some clarification on that?
Yes.
From the city attorney.
Yeah.
I wanted to address the question that Councilwoman Debumaru raised with respect to the role of the board and its discretion. So to some extent, that depends on the type of application that's before it. On a variance proceeding, they have more discretion than on some other things because the law about variances says that you can grant a variance if you think it's appropriate and it meets the criteria, but you don't have to. But on other types of applications, the law is clearer that the guidelines or the requirements or criteria in the ordinance themselves have to be that if you meet them, you are entitled to the use in question. When Mr. Byrd absolutely correctly says that the board takes into account the testimony of the residents. What that means is if the residents come forward and speak about facts for the board to take into account that go directly to the criteria, then the board will take into account the testimony that those facts exist, and exercise their judgment as to whether or not those facts do or don't meet the requirements of the ordinance in question. If a resident comes in and testifies about opinions on things that they may not be technically qualified to offer, then their testimony is going to get less deference because they're just offering an opinion, and the applicant may have brought in experts, architects or land planners or traffic surveyors or whatever that is. If the residents come in and testify about things that by law are not properly considered on that application, then the board doesn't consider those things because the board is constrained, as Mr. Byrd said, by the criteria that are set forth in the county ordinances.
So can I just ask a clarifying question? On December 12th, when the residents were in City Hall, when they attended this session, were the statements that the residents gave, were they facts or were they opinions? Did anyone look at whether, because I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I'm just trying to now understand based off of your comment, were they facts, were they opinions? Because you said that it wasn't taken to the county, and I'm trying to understand why.
Right, so I misspoke there. So, no, they're taking, I mean, we listen wholeheartedly to what the citizens have to say, and we take that into consideration. Factual, I would say no. I think a lot of the testimony is opinionated. All right, is opinion and or it's just something that's not based upon facts. So as the council mentioned, if those right. So as the council mentioned, if those things are not, if they don't, if the opinions do not disregard the criteria that's met or that's listed within the zoning ordinance that's being fulfilled by the developer, then that opinion is just that, an opinion.
As a follow-up, I'd just like to, if we could get together and cross-reference that, because if you're saying that they weren't facts, and it looks like to the residents and the audience they're saying that they were, I'd just like to make sure that that actually is what it is, and it wasn't just opinionated, and they actually, what they were saying didn't actually go against what, you know, the document laid out.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you. And
Thank
if you could, hold on 1 second. If you could address as well the question that the councilwoman asked of exactly how the notification is given to the public, that would be greatly appreciated.
That would be for the planning director to address. I'm not involved in the notice.
Mayor, what we do is we post the property with signs in advance, at least 2 weeks before the meeting, and we send out letters to all property owners within 500 feet of the property. So in this particular case, on our docket sheet, the very first page of our report are the dates of when the mailing was sent out for this DSP, the number of letters we sent, and the number of signs we posted for on the property, advertising the BAPB and city council hearings.
Follow-up question. And what type of facts are the residents given regarding what will be presented to them?
The items that are in a report, the testimony from the developer and his team, and those are the facts and the points of information that are given during the hearings.
So much of their testimony could be based in fact and not just opinion, correct?
If you're talking about the testimony that's given by the community, the residents who have signed up to speak, we have summarized their statements in our BAPB report. And I don't recall any facts being presented during the hearing. You can read it. It's right in there in the report about what the residents spoke of who signed up to speak at the BAPP hearing on November 12th.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I could add another point too, just to piggyback off what Mr. Frank mentioned. So they are listed within the report itself. If I'm not mistaken, there were six residents that showed up. 4 of those spoke. The majority of them were against the proposal, and 1 was for it. I don't see the one response, but if you look, Mr. Sidney Wise talked about inadequacy of public schools. Mr. Derek Mallett spoke about the cost of the new dwelling units. Ms. Jacqueline Grisette spoke about the widening of US Route 301, the lack of school sites, the TIF, lack of trees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want to sound callous, and I don't want the citizens to think that we as a board are callous as to what they bring before us. But really, like I said, there were 6 individuals here. It's highly publicized, just like the city council meetings are publicized. The meetings of the various committees are also publicized. Please, take a proactive stance and come and have your voices heard. But we cannot go off feelings and emotions. I know we take those into consideration, but we have a charter that we have to fulfill, and that's what we try to do to the best of our ability.
Okay, Mr. Byrd, having said that, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't want to harp too much on this because I know we have a couple presentations. I know you guys want to speak as well. Alyssa, can you just clarify something for me so I understand it? The charter that Mr. Byrd is referring to that governs the Advisory Planning Board is a charter created by the city, correct? It's set by us.
Technically, it's not a charter, but the provisions of the city's chapter on zoning, yes.
Okay, so the way the board governs and makes decisions can be changed, correct?
To some extent.
Okay.
The zoning ordinance needs to be approved by the county. The city, in other words, you've only been granted a limited amount of authority, and so if you, we were charged when we originally drafted those provisions with modeling the provisions of the county zoning ordinance with respect to its planning commission requirements. We just moved that authority from them to the city agency that was going to stand in its shoes, but we were expressly refused the ability to make substantive changes. So to some extent that depends on what you approached the county with and whether the county deemed it to be a substantive change or not.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Byrd?
Just one quick final point. And I want to move on to the applicant and the residents. But I just want to be clear. Mr. Byrd, you were the lone vote against this on the BAPB, right?
Yes, I was.
Okay, cool. So just to be clear, we're beating up on you right now because, you know, this is the next step of a long melodrama of a project that a lot of people have feelings about. But just to be clear, you actually voted against this on the BAPB. You're the chair of the group, and you're having to speak on behalf of a group that you disagreed with on this particular project.
Correct.
Just to be clear about that. Okay. Thank you for your time tonight, sir.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Byrd. One more.
I don't really have a question. I just wanted to say thank you because I know how difficult this has been, and it's been a long journey. So definitely thank you for all that you've been doing to lead it.
Thank you.
Mr. Byrd, I'd like to add to that because you know what? You're a volunteer in doing this, and we do appreciate that. I think you can understand the sentiment of the community, though, of wanting to make sure when their voices, when they take the time and the effort to come and speak, they want to make sure that their voices are heard.
Correct.
And so we just want to make sure that as we move forward, that we understand that understanding the guardrails that are up for what you need to do as far as following what the ordinances are and everything. I also understand when the citizens show up to talk, they expect to be heard. And we need to continue to make sure that their voices are heard, and we document that.
I understand that. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
But again, the citizens also have to realize that they have to be the opinions need to be factually or based in facts as well. And not to diminish their feelings or their impressions on a certain issue, but if those feelings do not substantiate some sort of finding of fact, I mean, they go mute.
Well, I think all of us have those moments where we do need to share our opinions.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Arthur Horn, representing the developer, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the Bowie City Council. For the record, Arthur Horn with the law office of Shipley Horn in Largo, Maryland, here representing the applicant in this case. And we just first say congratulations to the mayor and the new council in the election, and to the council who were re-elected. It's good to be back in front of the city of Bowie again. I'm here to talk about South Lake, formerly known as Carrington. This project, and my team is here, it's a joint development with the NAI Michael Companies and Chesapeake Realty Partners. NAI Michael Companies represented by Mr. Kevin Kennedy and Mr. Julian Curry, who are here. Chesapeake Realty Partners is represented by Mr. Scott Rout and Jamie Atkinson, who's here. We have engineers from the Rogers Engineering, Mr. Nat Ballard and Mr. Charlie Howe. We also have engineers from Ben Dyer Engineering Association, Mr. Paul Woodburn is here. We have our traffic engineer who's here from Lenhart Traffic, Mr. Mike Lenhart. We have our community consultant from Perez Consultants, Mr. Tony Perez, who is here. I'm actually co-counsel in this case with attorney Matt Tedesco, McNamee and Hosey, who was unable to be here today. What I want to do, Mr. Mayor, is first and foremost say that as the applicant, we agree with Bowie City staff's recommendations, their findings of fact and conclusions of law. This is the detailed site plan for which is the final stage of a comprehensive zone. We've been through the conceptual site plan, we've been through the preliminary plan of subdivision, and we're here at the conceptual, we're here at the detailed site plan. There may be, for the new members and others, there may be some who are not quite familiar with South Lake, so I want to just spend a few minutes just giving you a presentation of what South Lake is all about, if you all don't mind. And I think Nat's going to come up here and run that through really quickly. It's only about, maybe 15 or 20 slides. They got it. I'll go ahead.
Good evening. My name's Nat Ballard from Rogers Consulting. I'm just going to run through a couple slides for everybody, as Arthur had stated, just to orient you for the project. I believe everyone's familiar with the location at the corner of Central Avenue and Crane Highway. This is an image from the original Carrington preliminary plan. It's a rendering that shows the development, and for comparison's sake, this is the rendering we have today. It's gone through a number of changes over time, and where we are today, we're proposing the detailed site plan before you proposes 1,035 residential units. It's adjacent to the Liberty Sports Park, which is an important component. It's going to be a good neighbor for the development. What I'm going to attempt to do here is show you the various detailed site plans that are going to make up the entire South Lake development. There's a number of detailed site plans, some of which have yet to come before you. The first one is the infrastructure detailed site plan. It involves just the roads that are highlighted and nothing else. It's just infrastructure, doesn't deal with any architecture. It's just to lay out the most important roads throughout the site, the internal roads. Detailed site plan 16054 is for multifamily development, 325 units that sit right on Crane Highway. The first two detailed site plans, sorry to go back, DSP 05042 has been accepted by the county for review, and DSP 16054 has also been accepted for review, the multifamily. These next couple have yet to be submitted for review. DSP 19021 covers the area highlighted here. That is the Phase 1 commercial detailed site plan. There's a second phase of commercial that's located up along Old Central Avenue in the northern section of the site that has not been submitted. That is, for our purposes, several years off before it's going to come forward. And then the case that you have before you here tonight is the detailed site plan 19023, which, as I had mentioned, is pending acceptance and covers 1,035 residential units. Just for comparison's sake, for open space or green space comparison between the preliminary plan known as Carrington on the right-hand side versus the new plan, both of them in excess of 160 acres of green space, with the current plan having just slightly more, about an acre and a half more than the original proposal. This slide is meant to show you how the rec facilities, the areas are dispersed throughout the development. Each of the green circles represents a different rec facility, and the 11 proposed facilities are listed on the right-hand side there, including various playgrounds, clubhouses, fitness stations, trails throughout the project. The red line that goes north-south on the, let me see if this works, that goes north-south on the plan is the master plan trail that's within the public right-of-way. And we also have propose a trailhead located in the Phase 1 commercial section. Details for that will be presented when that detailed site plan comes forward. The next series of slides quickly runs through the architecture for the site, just representative architecture. Some of the architecture you're about to see is included in this application. The architecture towards the end is part of the townhouse and single-family detached. That is part of a separate detailed site plan called an umbrella architecture detailed site plan. That will also come before you, but it's a separate application for this and not subject to the review for DSP 19023. So what we have here is views of the clubhouse. This is the front view and the rear view. From this bottom side, it kind of opens up onto a pool deck, and there'll be a pool associated with the clubhouse. This next slide is representative architecture for the condominiums. These are called 2/2 condominiums. There's a lower unit here with a residence, and then residents that live above that. They each have a garage that are accessed from an alley that is behind those units, and they are subject to this detailed site plan. This is actually, I'm sorry for the error, but this is titled condominiums, but these are actual architecture units. This is the start of the architecture that's part of a separate detailed site plan, what we refer to as DSP 19024. It's a separate case, but I wanted to give you an idea of what the type of architecture that's going to come forward with the project. So these are the townhouses. These are wider townhouses that are in the application. And the next series of 5 or 6 slides are the single family. What we heard earlier in meetings was that having a ranch style product with first floor master bedrooms is very important. So the builders here do offer that product. These next 2 slides after this are all ranch style or first floor master. And then the next couple of slides are just single-family, more traditional colonial single-family architecture. And then finally, wanted to put a slide in here that showed the residential signage that's going to be with this application. These are all various place markers throughout the development. The top sign will be in front of the community center. The South Lake sign you see on the left here, it will be around the traffic circle that is in the middle of the residential neighborhood. And then as place markers to some of the different sections of residential, we'll have this type of sign, which the meadows would change depending on which section you're about to enter to kind of set apart different neighborhoods in the community.
So the entire site, as was mentioned, is about 381 acres. We're here with that detailed site plan to discuss the 283 of those acres, 1,035 units, and the 5,272-foot clubhouse and recreational area. It was mentioned the property is zoned EIA, a comprehensive design zone that's developed as if it was MXT, mixed use. As mentioned before, we've had a conceptual site plan and a preliminary plan of subdivision that has already taken place for this development. Even more so than that, there's an annexation agreement, as you know, with the city of Bowie. Mr. Stevens said in his presentation 2006, but it was actually 2016, it had several supplemental clarifying covenants that were agreed between the city and the property owner over the next couple of years. It was formally completed back in January of this year, 2019. And as been mentioned before, concurrent with the finalization of the annexation agreement, the city reviewed and approved a TIF agreement, also reviewed and approved by Prince George's County, that will generate $80 million in new additional revenue for the city during the life of the TIF, and above repaying the initial TIF bond without requiring any tax increase or additional city debt. The final approval of the TIF for the county occurred in April of this past year. So this mixed-use development we talked about has been pretty much largely unchanged, with the exception of we have taken away a lot of the rental and moved to fee simple ownership. And the detailed site plan process that we're going through now mentions the four corners. It's basically architecture, and this is a large project, so it's going to take some time. So we decided to break it up into many different detailed site plans. So each one of the ones that were mentioned earlier, we have to come back and sit and with you all and talk to you about that. This one right here, again, is just the one showing the community center and just approval for the sites for the number of units. We've been sitting here listening to the previous presentation, and we've been before the planning council, the community, dozens of meetings. So we understand this school is an issue, and I think Mr. Rivera addressed it earlier. I think in this particular case, we can say that South Lake is going to produce $22 million worth of money going towards the public school system. How that's going to be, whether that's going to be all directly into the city of Bowie or not, we can't say, but certainly this creates $22 million. But even before that, as far back as in 2007, this application actually donated $250,000 towards the Whitehall Elementary School in Bowie so that they can meet capacity. There was a tenant that was in there, so the applicant, with an agreement through the city, relocated that tenant so that Whitehall Elementary School could increase its capacity. So there's been a long working relationship between the applicants in this process and the city of Bowie and with the county. So I think that's important to note. And again, we were pledged to work with you all as well to try to talk with the individuals that may listen. I'm not sure if we would accomplish anything, but we can let them know that every time we go to these meetings, it's not just this project. People want money directed to the community in which for their schools in the community in which they live. But that's just not the way the system is currently set up. So, that may be a legislative fix that needs to happen. But like I say, but the amount of the demonstrated proof that this applicant has had by contributing money when he didn't have to previously, and the money that's going to to occur once the development builds out to about 22 million is going to be very significant, and hopefully that money could be used for the school system that could benefit the Bowie. Just really quickly, lastly, we talked about the concerns the community had. Transportation was another issue that we talked about. We went through the preliminary plan of subdivision. We already have passed the adequacy of public facility test. It was for a development this large, even larger, because Carrington, this applicant, all they had to do is pay about $760,000 in a fee in lieu, and they could have moved forward. But instead, the developers, decided to do some direct construction on several substantial road improvements on Route 301 and Central Avenue, and they're doing that well before the start of the construction of the buildings. So they elected to do that to make sure that you go concurrent with the development to approximately about $9 million worth of construction that's going to start probably as early as next year that the developer is funding. So, in addition to that, with reference to the covenants between the city and the developer, there is some discussion concerning road improvements with increase in density. So, as Mr. Wolfrey and others may remember from before, that was part of the agreement that we would not increase any density in the future, because that was a concern that was mentioned by this city council, but it's actually set in the covenants. So having said that, I'll just say again that your staff has analyzed our application for the site plan. It meets all the criteria. They've stated so with some conditions. We agree to all the conditions that they stated, and we're here to answer any questions you all may have or community may have.
Okay. If we could first, Mr. City Manager, if you could you give us, and bear with me as I maybe take a little different approach to this at this moment. One of the things that I think all of us should be aware is that the previous city council has taken us very, very far down this road. And I think everyone should be kind of brought up to speed onto where we're inheriting this process at. I will make a statement in saying one of the main reasons that this project was taken on was that there was a feeling that there was a food desert in that part of the city. And so a part of that was to make sure to address that as one of the issues. But I think it's important if we could have the city manager kind of make sure everyone is aware how far down the road we are and where we stand right now, if you don't mind.
No, sir. When I arrived 3 years ago, the city had already entered into an annexation agreement with the developer to support the South Lake project, and that was later on consummated when the annexation occurred. So this property they reference is in the city of Bowie, and it was further involved by the city committing into tax increment financing, which is a method of taking the taxes that would be generated by these properties and pledging them to support the development, to build infrastructure, roads, curbs, stormwater, all those things that we all need in any development in the city. There was also an assessment regarding additional potential for additional public works that would be necessary, and police. And the previous council supported the project, as I mentioned. And so this is currently a city project, and along with the developer. And there was a need for the right commercial retail items to be in this development, in particular a large grocery store that most people have to drive several miles from this area to take advantage of what I have in Northridge, which is 5 grocery stores within 15 minutes of my house. So We've been through the preliminary plan of subdivision, conceptual site plans. The city has entered into a covenant with the developer regarding this development. So there may be some legal issues that maybe the attorney can get, but these are the things from a development plan review and joint exercise with the organization. So we are decisively engaged and involved in this process as a city at this point.
And could you, again, remind us what the vote was previously, prior to this council?
My recollection was 5-2.
Okay, so I say that to make sure that everyone understands that we're inheriting a project that covenants have been drawn, that the city has engaged in. To oversimplify it, I would say that we have contracts that we have engaged the developer with to this process. Having said that, we will now talk about some of the questions that we have, but I want everyone to know that that's where we're starting this process. That's where we are with this. And so I'm going to start with a few questions at this point, and bear with me.
Okay.
Excuse me, Mayor, we got to do the public hearing from the
Okay, go ahead, I'm
residents
sorry,
first.
yes. Okay. I would also say something we may want to look at in the future is making sure that maybe we can address some of the questions first and afford you, the citizens, a chance to come back with any additional questions you have after that. But as it stands now, we will start. Please state your name and your address when you come up. I'm about to call the first name. Jacqueline Grisette. And if I butcher anyone's name, please blame it on my head and not my heart.
Oh, it's no problem. I've been butchered here a lot of ways tonight, especially when my testimony was recorded of things that I didn't even say. But I'll make sure I say them tonight. I live in a country that has a Constitution and a First Amendment. So the last thing that I heard is that I can come to these forums, I can speak, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not going to know every zoning code, but I am going to tell you exactly what citizens feel about this development. I do think it's important that you get more history, though, than you've been given tonight. South Lake didn't come as a South Lake out of the womb, and it certainly wasn't begun just to get us commercial stores and grocery stores. The development began, I think, approximately in 2004, and I would call it one of the most egregious examples of what is wrong with both the ethics of development in Prince George's County, as well as what happens when Bowie is either not afforded zoning power or executes its role in protecting its citizens. Audrey Scott, a former mayor and city council member, was ending her tenure on the Prince George's County Council. During her political career, she had many years of campaign finance contributions from persons affiliated with the NAI Michaels Company. She put forth in the twilight session of the County Council a bill to change the zoning of the acres of the land that are now part of South Lake. Scott did this without consultation with citizens, without there being any inherent demand for housing, and without any commitments from the developer to produce housing and retail consistent with the portion of South Bowie and the adjacent rural tier. The development was called Carrington at that time. The partners were Gary Murray, a protege of Wayne Curry, and Ken Michaels. The planner who led the approval process with MNC PPC was a Curry campaign contributor, but did not disclose this nor recuse herself from decision-making. To this day, every county executive and almost every county council member representing Bowie who has had to make a vote on this project has received campaign financing from a Michael. Citizens immediately opposed the lack of schools, the planned size, the housing mix, the traffic problems that would ensue on 301, the devastation to trees, and the gigantic amount of retail planned in a community where Pointer Ridge Plaza was already showing vacancies, Collington Plaza has vacancies, and as you know, Bowie Town Center is now struggling. We argued no schools were available to serve the multi-unit housing scale that's been presented here tonight. It is not smart development, as no major bus lines nor metro service abuts this portion of the county, nor is any planned. The city of Bowie initially supported our views and joined us in an appeal to the county council. We were promised by the council when it rendered its decision, via a letter from Councilman Doug Peters, that the developer would meet with the Citizen Advisory Board from the adjacent communities at every stage of the development. Indeed, that Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission would require it before the developer moved on to additional stages of planning. I'm here to tell you that that has not happened on any scale or with any frequency since this development began. Carrington gained its initial approval by promising the following: no tax dollars would be needed for road improvements, the developer would fund them, and indeed there would even be a shuttle to go to Metro. The developer would set aside funds for a school. No one tonight in any of these hearings seems to take responsibility for who is actually going to make sure funds are put aside and given to a city so that they can have their schools. The design that we saw then did not have all of the density that we are seeing today. And last hearing, 919 apartments were mentioned that have mysteriously disappeared today. The developer agreed, Ken Michaels, in a meeting with the advisory committee to our face, that they would not remove the trees along 301 unless they had to allow the property to blend with the existing tree protection of the rural tier and to protect the look of the community adjacent to Collington Station. The first thing that went in this project before anything was put up is they shaved every tree to the ground. Even the Maryland National Park and Planning Commission, at our last zoning hearing for the rural tier, said they were shocked when they saw it. The developer's amount of retail was reduced in the first approval plan we saw for Carrington. We are now hearing, I think if I heard it right, 500,000 square feet of retail. How is that going to work with Bowie Town Center in the condition it is today, north of us, Waugh Chapel, and secondly, the horror of Westphalia, where these promises were made, and when they can't fill them, we have no letters of intent about who is going to be the retail people, you end up with discount retail and the current horror of Bowie Town Center. This Liberty Sports thing we never saw until the last hearing. Fast forward, Murray and Ann Michaels fell apart over a lawsuit. Other proposed partners backed out. Now we have Southlake LLC, which has not fulfilled any of the prior promises. This is simply unacceptable. Now, instead of the cost being borne by the developer, as it was initially talked about, a TIF has been created. I am a business person. This is essentially a great project for NAI Michaels. There's minimal risk. You are funding the cost of it, or the taxpayers of Prince George's County, but there are tremendous risks to the city of Bowie and neighboring communities: overcrowded roads, and overtaxed Bowie or Largo high schools, planned housing density at lower prices that are likely to lower the value of existing homes in the corridor. Just being blunt, we don't want two Bowies: a North Bowie that is largely single-family homes with higher-end retail, and a South Bowie that is stereotyped with density, low-priced apartments, and discount retail. For the sake, thank you. For the sake of Bowie Town Center, for the sake of our schools, and dare I say it, for the potential for better race relations in our city, do not allow this monstrosity to go forward as it is planned. Don't let the desire for annexation, tax dollars cloud your judgment. Think about the quality of life for citizens in Bowie. Send a message to the County Council, to the Maryland National Park and Planning Commission, and to these developers. It's time to change. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Johnny Williams.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Council. My name is Johnny Williams. I live in Collington Station, 15107 Johnstone. I'm just going to mention some concerns I have that I want the Council to consider before they approve this DSP 19023. As I was looking at the notice of public hearing, and I was looking at this map, I noticed that over 75% of the total build-out of the residential dwellings have been proposed with this application without any planned commercial or retail commitment. And I think that's dangerous because we're not holding the developers accountable to do that, what they say that we're going to do. And I don't think that should happen. I don't think that amount of build-out should be allowed. My second concern is the planned entrances for the site does not seem to be proposed with, I heard one of the lawyer for the developer say that they were going to plan the roads in a separate application, but I believe those roads should be built before these residential units go up. And my concern is the access for emergency vehicles. If all of the entrances aren't built before these homes and all of these residential developments are put up. My third concern is the limits of clearing shown on this South Lake detailed site planning limits that we received with this public hearing notice. It seems to me that the limits are going all the way to the edge of the property, and with usually you see some tree save areas or bubbled areas where tree saves would be. And with this, the way this is drawn up, it doesn't show where these tree save areas, so we can't hold the developers accountable if we don't know where the tree save areas are. I'm also concerned about the 1,000 homes being proposed without any dedicated land set aside for public schools. I think the answer to all of the questions about schools, instead of paying public school system, maybe the developers should set aside some land for a school to be built. That would be a better solution.
Okay.
And my last concern is about the roads going into the site. Will traffic lights be placed at the south and northbound lanes of 301 at the main entrance? Without doing that, without placing some type of traffic signal there, it's going to be very dangerous for cars to go north on 301 or even south on 301 going out into that traffic. So that's my concerns, which you will consider.
Hey, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Philip Murray.
Good evening, Philip Murray, Collington Station. Good evening to you all. It's going to be pretty cut and dried. I find it unconscionable that we're at this stage. There's no one in here, developers included, that thinks this is a good idea. I know this because it makes no sense. I'm not an expert. I have an opinion, but my opinion is predicated in common sense. I've not always had common sense, but this makes absolutely no sense. You can't put a small city right there the way 301 is and Central Avenue is right now, and unless it's widened today, you can't tell me that it's not going to have a negative impact on everyone that lives around there. You can't tell me that. Bowie High School doesn't have a shower. Okay? Bowie High School doesn't have a shower. How are all of these people with these nice, pretty pictures of these houses, each one of these houses is going to have a family, going to have kids? How are they getting to Metro? If they're driving, they're going to impact 301 and Central Avenue. Where are those kids going to go to school? I mean, I'm not an urban planner, I'm not an engineer, I'm not an architect. I'm in healthcare, was. But this makes no sense to anybody in here. So this can't pass. So I'm hoping and praying that it doesn't pass. And if anybody gets butthurt, mad, disappointed, ticked off, then they need to put that on the shoulders of those that allowed this to happen. People are supposed to look out for us. That's not happening. You know, this absolutely cannot happen. So that's my 2 cents, and I hope you do the right thing.
Thank you. Sidney Wise.
Sid Wise, 618 Jennings Mills Drive. You know, I've heard pretty much from my colleagues here, pretty much what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. Bowie schools cannot accommodate this site plan of this project. Bowie has 10 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, 1 normal high school. The other high school, Tall Oaks, is not a normal high school. It's a school somewhat like a last chance for a lot of students. They have bad conduct, bad behavior, pregnant students, and so that's not part of the machinery for schools. Bowie High School has no showers for the athletes. My grandson played left tackle, defensive tackle on the football team, and when I picked him up, and the scent and the smell I got was outrageous. And I said, "Son, don't you have a shower?" They said, "No, we don't have a shower." Now, I grew up in Washington, D.C., and we weren't supposed to have an elite school system, but it seemed to me we must have had elite school systems because all of the schools had showers. Bowie High School is substantially in disrepair, disgusting, dirty, and they have 20 vacancies there. I say all this to say that some time ago, Bowie was supposed to be the Silicon Valley of the East Coast. But when the Silicon people came here and took a look at our school system, they said, "No way." And so they moved to Reston, Virginia, to the Fairfax school system. And the Fairfax school system is and it's in the top 5 in the United States. And I think we should be the top. We should be the flagship of this area. This area has basically middle-class folks, have basically educated folks, and professional folks. And why can't we have a school system reflective of who we are? We are not a class of people with no showers.
I'm going to ask you to
now
just a little bit quicker.
Each one of the schools that I mentioned is substantially overcrowded. They depend on trailers, and the trailers bring about a greater expense to heat and cool. This project would require, let's see, this project is about 2,600 students more, and it would require substantially bus service. It would require more bus drivers, maintenance on the buses, and more risk to the schools. I don't understand why you got $27 million tied up into this project for a park. For a park, for what? We have plenty of parks. The park they describe up here is really Allen Pond 2.
Okay.
It's basically Allen Pond 2.
So we can get to the
and we have an underused sports complex, sports field up off Woodmore Road and Mitchellville Road, Jennings Mill Road, the street that I live on. the deer plays around out there.
Thank you, sir.
The deer
We're
plays
gonna have
around
to
out there. I don't see any people out there.
move along for those who are coming behind you.
Okay.
All righty.
I got more to say, but I'm going to hold off now.
Thank you so very much.
Okay, bye.
William Henke. Please try to limit your comments to 2 minutes.
Absolutely, Mayor. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. My name is William Henke, and I live in the Queen Anne Estates neighborhood, directly across 301 from the proposed project. I'm also a member of the Prince George's Citizens for Smart Development, as are a number of our speakers tonight. This group has had 3 meetings over the past 3 months. It's made up of residents from the neighborhoods that surround the project. And a lot of the folks in the room tonight have been at these meetings. And I'll just say, you know, if you folks in the room have concerns about this project, please raise your hand right now. Okay, a lot of folks. Okay. Tonight, on behalf of these folks that have been meeting, I want to ask you to postpone your approval of the site plan 10923. Which represents the first and arguably most important site plan that will come before this council on the project. I would ask that you defer your decision pending careful further study of the impacts of this mega development on the surrounding community. And I have 2 quick points to raise. One, on home values. If the council were to approve the site plan, it would greenlight the heart of the project. At the September 19th stakeholder meeting here in this room, the developer was not willing to tell us the planned cost of the new homes or even a range of pricing. So we're wondering, you know, what will this have, what effect will this have on our home values? All of us here have scrimped and saved to come up with our down payments and make our monthly mortgage payment. This is our one major financial asset. Just as we are emerging from our mortgages being underwater for the best part of 10 years, we're now facing a new uncertainty. The area of the county is principally populated by single-family homes on well-tended lots. What effect will this densely packed city that includes townhouses, condos, and apartments have on our home value? No one seems to know. In addition, as has been stated by other speakers, the developer has produced no evidence that it has solid commitments or even letters of intent from commercial property owners that would populate the shops, hotels, offices, and restaurants of this project. What's going to happen to our home values if this part of the development never materializes? One need only look to the Westphalia development and their battle with an almost built Amazon industrial warehouse, for an example. My second point is on the TIF. It's been mentioned numerous times tonight. The county and the city approved this special tasking district to provide $27.5 million in future tax receipts from the folks who are going to live here. The developer, of course, doesn't have to pay this back. Therefore, this is a gift to the developer. And will this taxpayer money, as it should be, used for public use? Well, if you look at the documents, the developer's proposal says the largest share, $8.6 million, is going to build the lakes on the property. That's a feature of their development, which they admit will be used as a drainage ditch during construction. How is that a public use? A further $4.7 million from this account will be used to construct the entrance roads into the development, their own roads. $1.6 million will be used by the developer for sewers. These are costs that should be borne by the developer. This tax money, if it materializes, should be used for other things, such as a new school. Should not the developer also be required to devise an alternative transportation plan for thousands of new residents? As mentioned before, maybe a shuttle, maybe a dedicated ride-sharing app. This should be a requirement. This should not be, as the developer said at the stakeholder meeting, something they'll look into. That would be a better use for TIF money. Therefore, for these reasons, I would urge the council to delay a decision on the site plan 19023 to give the city more time to study the impacts of this project and to adjust the site plan accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. Renee Jackson.
Renee Jackson, resident of Collington Station.
Address.
been a resident here in Collington Station for about 26 years. It's a beautiful community, and it runs adjacent to this new project at the new South Lake development, it's called. 2008, 7-8, I was on the board at Collington Station, and I had the opportunity to work on the Carrington project, which eventually was delayed and therefore rejected, and it lay dormant for a number of years. And so I wasn't very pleased to hear that it had resurrected itself over the last few years. But all I can say is all the things that my residents and neighbors have talked about here in terms of the school system being overloaded, the transportation, the last study of the transportation system around the Carrington project took place under the Carrington project, and I don't believe there's been an updated traffic report that's done. But I'm sure many of the residents that are here tonight can attest to the obvious traffic congestion that we have on Route 301 between Maryland 214 and Route 50 up to Crofton. It can take you between 3 o'clock and 7 o'clock in the evening. It can take you an hour to get 3 miles on 301 as it is now. And I know there had been talk about putting a service road that runs adjacent to 301. I don't know where that is right now, but there's a lot of infrastructure in terms of traffic that needs to take place before development of this magnitude comes to Bowie. And I think we should think long and hard about putting something that could be this detrimental to the community before much thought goes into it. Thank you.
Thank you. Jerry Heatherstone.
Jerry Featherstone? How you doing, Mr. Mayor?
Good evening.
Jerry Featherstone, 524 Jordan Pond Lane, Bowie, Maryland. And I just want to say briefly, just like the other citizens did, we request that you just pause. Take a look at what's going on here. Take your time and do the right thing for us. I came here in 2002, Navy, retired. So I didn't choose to be here, but then I stayed here. I live in Collington Station. Collington Station is developed beautifully. There's the handicap access on every corner. There is sidewalks in front of every home. It's very, very nice. I don't know how this developer is going to do, but we don't want it to change. Another one of our citizens said, we don't want a different South Bowie and a North Bowie. Bowie is the crown jewel of Prince George's County. We want to stay that way. We don't want to just settle for anything. Keep Bowie the crown jewel of Prince George's County. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Stan Abney.
How you doing, Mr. Mayor?
Good evening.
And, council members, my name is Stan Abney. I'm at 913 Jamesview Lane in Collington Station. We had a lot of people in our community talk tonight about the development, which we don't want in our backyard. Nobody talks about schools. You said 13 elementary schools are scheduled to come to the county, but none to Bowie area. That's a problem in itself. I understand that y'all inherited this, and this fell into y'all lap. This is not something that's been ongoing with y'all, and I understand that. But what we see with developers in this county, if you look at Oak Grove, they promise infrastructure to our roads. Nothing has been done yet. I can't even get out my neighborhood on Church Road. Okay, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, it's a racetrack. Not only that, you got people now that go to Oak Creek that cut through our neighborhood, okay? When I go out my neighborhood, I have 4 or 5 cars in front of me, they turn into Oak Creek. That's a problem in itself. That shows you right there, we don't have the infrastructure for all these communities coming on board. We heard Mr. Gardner talk about all these housing developments that are coming up in the county. All we're going to do is overpopulate Prince George's County, Bowie, and we're going to be like Waldorf. It's just going to be one big traffic jam after another around here. We need to look at the schools. We need to look at the infrastructure, these roads, and take a chill on trying to build so many houses around here. That's all I got to say.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor. And before I get started, may I congratulate the election of the new members to this body and to the re-election of the other three. I hope you have a good tenure. I don't know if this is a good start or not, but I feel like the ghost of Christmas past. My address is 16403 Pointer Ridge Drive, Bowie, Maryland. And I've been living there for 50 and a half years. So I'm an old timer. I don't have much time left, maybe. I'm trying to hit the century mark so I can start saying that I'm 1 year old again. Anyway, I did have a speech prepared, but my friend, Miss Grisette, and all the ones that followed her presented it very well. I was a member. I was one of the members that went on a bus tour with Mr. Michaels, and he showed us 3 developments which showed us that we wouldn't even know that there's a commercial development in the development itself. And it really, really impressed us. And he said, I promise you will not know that there's a commercial area in that development. And as you can see, it's sitting right there on 301. And they said it was true on those developments. There was no signs telling there's a Giant or Lord and Taylor or a Subway. You didn't know it was there until you turned the corner and said, oh, here it is. But here is the development that has the commercial sitting right on 301. And I've been told by the developer now that there's going to be signages on 301 saying, Giant is here, and Lord and Taylor is here, and Subway, and all the other stores. That's light pollution right there. We already see it at Collington Shopping Center. You have lights there. There's a new development that's going to be built on the other side, on the east side of 301, which is going to complicate things. The road itself will not handle 1,500 homes that's going to go into that development. They're talking about 1,000 homes going up now. But when the city of Bowie incorporated, took the incorporation of that property, they said that they could build 1,200 homes in 10 years. And then they had the option of getting another 300 homes in there to make it 1,500 homes. I don't know. You got, by the time you got 3,000 cars coming out of that development. By the time it gets filled up for 10 years, you got another 4,000 cars added with the children's cars. Don't know where they're going to put those cars on the roads. We did have a citizens group that met with the with the developer, and we started with them to give them input on what we wanted the development to look like. But we only had 2 meetings, and then they cut it short because they found marble or clay on the development, and they couldn't build on that. And that's what held this development up for 20 years? I think it's 20 years, yeah. So as you can see, it's been there a long time, and you have money now invested in this development because the city of Bowie has given them money to get them started. So I guess you're stuck with it. But I don't know how you're going to do it, but if you do approve it, try to do the best you can to keep us from drowning in because the development, our commercial development is dying now. Thank you.
Ms. Deetra Trass? Deetra Trass? Fiona Moody? Good evening.
Good evening. Hi, Fiona Moody, 13205 Ithan Lane. For many of you, who a lot of you have seemed to have disappeared, tonight is the first opportunity to discuss South Lake and hear directly from residents about the development. I can understand that the temptation for many of you is to simply move forward with the project and lay blame on your predecessors. Unfortunately, we have heard it from the council hundreds of times that this is simply a formality this evening, and we are in the middle of a process that should be seen through to the end without any opposition due to the ramifications that might have. However, let me caution you. We all know that this election was a referendum on overdevelopment. This year, I personally knocked on over 5,000 doors and spoke to residents in every corner of Bowie, and I can tell you that the vast majority of your constituents do not approve of South Lake. 1,000 more homes means 3,000 more cars on our road, 2,000 more children in our schools. In the report for South Lake, it says that was consideration given to building a new elementary school? Response: this development has already been through the adequate public facilities process when issues such as impacts on public schools, roads, etc. have been addressed. The county school board sets the priorities as to the needs of the school system and indicated that no elementary school is needed as a result of this development. I find that hard to believe. When Levitt Bowie was built over 50 years ago, we had an elementary school practically for every neighborhood. And in 2019, Prince George's County Public Schools are already up by 4,000 students. 700 of those are elementary school students. Between now and 2027, Prince George's County Public Schools are expecting an increase of over 2,200 elementary school students. Where are they going to go to school? Development up and down Route 3 has gotten so bad that the Anne Arundel County Executive is considering a moratorium on development. We should be considering the same here in Prince George's County and Bowie. That may sound draconian, but our schools are bursting at the seams and traffic is forcing many residents to move. These are facts and not opinions. Many of you didn't. Many of you did not face opposition from incumbents. However, it is my belief and the belief of my fellow residents that several of the individuals who opted not to run for re-election did so because they believed their re-election was uncertain. That uncertainty developed from years of dissatisfaction with their constituents over projects like this, Melford, Marketplace, and Pecan Ridge. Your no vote this evening may very well be symbolic in nature, and it may not stop the development, as we all know that the county does as it pleases. However, what it does is it sends a message to your constituents. It says, I am on your side, I represent you, and I hear you. It reassures residents that you believe their children deserve better than an overcrowded school district that boasts 27% proficiency in reading and 11% in mathematics. I urge you to take the higher ground and stand by your constituents and vote no. Thank you.
Thank you. trying to wait for them to come back.
Oh.
What I'd like to do at this time is, with the city attorney, I don't mind it. It's about transparency. And so I'd like to ask a few questions directly that you can address for us. And that is, number one, what are the risk or the downside to where we are right now?
That is a thing that I cannot advise you in open session.
Okay.
The land matter, land development matter. She has to do that.
I understood. City manager, anything you can add?
Well, sir, we have to listen to our residents and understand what they've said. We also have to look at the legal aspects of management and the circumstances. And I recommend that we, it's my recommendation under the circumstances that you all would postpone the vote until we have an opportunity to speak with the city attorney in closed session, so you all can be informed regarding the legal aspects of this project and our position.
I said that in open session so that you would understand what we're about to do. Again, that goes back to transparency and knowing that we understand and we hear you. And having said that, I'd like to entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, could we just have an opportunity to...
Well, we can...
We got through all the list? Yeah. Have we got through all the list? Oh, we did?
That's it.
Okay.
That's all that we have on the agenda, correct?
Yes, sir.
So we're just moving right ahead. And I don't want to keep you much longer than we need to keep you. So, if you have some comments?
Yeah, just a couple quick remarks. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, I appreciate it. So first of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming out tonight. This project has been in discussion for some time now, and this is the most public opposition we've seen so far. My colleague, Dufour Wolfley, and I were on the council previously when this came up. And for those of you who don't know, Dufour and I, we come to council meetings with one shoe half unlaced so that we can access it easier to be able to pound it on the table in opposition to whatever, at the time, the majority was doing. And we have been the two most consistent voices on the council, voicing what you're describing tonight, which is concerns about development and excess growth in this area. I just want to, as a way of a little bit of context, to kind of take this a little bit beyond just this conversation about South Lake tonight. Politics moves very slowly. So for several decades now, the city of Bowie's policy has basically been to expand, annex, grow, increase development wherever possible. That has been the formal city policy, and that was the case when I got on the council 4 years ago. And it took us 4 years and a recall and then an election to start to change that. And now you're looking at a council, I don't think I'm saying anything incorrect, that's much, much, much more akin to your views on development than the previous council was. So that's the good news. In neighboring jurisdictions, as one of the speakers pointed out, in Anne Arundel County, you saw a county executive unexpectedly lose an election, and the new county executive is now trying to put a legal moratorium to stop development temporarily. We're seeing other things similarly in Howard County and other jurisdictions. The issue that we have is that this council, for the most part, does not have the final say on development. That's kind of the problem. We can say no to every project that comes before us in the next 4 years, and 95% of the time it will not matter, because the final decision maker in this area is the Prince George's County Council, typically acting as the district council. And the issue we have here is that Prince George's County, by and large, from their vantage point, at this stage, they don't feel like they have a lot of reasons to say no to development. They badly need the money. You go to any of the budget sessions in the county, they're constantly short on cash for schools, for everything else. They need the money. There's also this lingering feeling in Prince George's that we're like the neglected stepchild. And so there's still kind of this attitude that, oh, if people want to come to Bowie to build things, that's good. That means we're desirable, like Northern Virginia or somewhere else. There's still some of that residual mentality as well. So what I'm suggesting tonight is you have a council that's very much on your side on this issue. Our two challenges are, one, the previous council has locked us in to some decisions, and so we're going to have to figure out as a group how we want to work with that and make sure that we don't end up accidentally inviting unintended consequences that end up hurting all of us in the long term, right, you guys included. The second challenge we have is making sure that the discussions about development don't just stop tonight. We need to take this conversation to Upper Marlboro. We need to take this conversation to the county council. They need to hear your opposition as well. We've each got, a few thousand residents in our little districts. The at-large county council members have 900,000 constituents, right? If 500 of them are upset, they don't notice that as much. But we need a persistent drumbeat of vocalizing our concerns about schools, about traffic, about public infrastructure, and public safety. We need them to keep hearing how there's no shower at Bowie High. We need them to hear that in Upper Marlboro. And so that's all really I just have to say tonight.
Thank you.
This conversation needs to continue at the county level. Otherwise, it's not going to make a difference. Thank you.
Councilman. Comment? If we can,
Thank you,
quickly.
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will save time and not speak at length just because Mr. Estev pretty much covered all the bases. This is something that we've been opposing for some time. The issue I do have a question for the developers, if representation could come forward on that from that group.
Okay.
Thank you, appreciate it. The question I have is on the nature of this development. You guys have advertised this as a mixed-use property, correct? Correct. So what I see before us, though, is something that to me does not look like mixed use. What I see is a collection of single-family and other residents behind an area of retail and other development. And they're all kind of coming at separate times. We spoke to that earlier. There's nothing that indicates, in my mind, that this really is mixed use, as in you walk out of your door and you can walk to the grocery store, you can walk to the C-store, you could walk to this other amenity that's nearby. What I see is a segregated housing area, I see a segregated retail area, I see a segregated apartment area, all of it kind of in its own little pod and not integrated, not mixed use. These could be dropped in at any place at any time. Why is that the mode that you guys have chosen on this?
Okay. Excuse me, I'll just jump here. Hi, good evening. I'm Kevin Kennedy from Michael Companies. I'm going to respond to that question if you don't mind, just because I think the answer really touches on, for the most part, the future or other development applications. So we've got the slide up on the screen that shows the different detailed site plan numbers. So to speak to the integration, this is actually a pretty well integrated community. We have certain challenges with topography and geography of the land itself. But we have taken great pains, and we've actually improved over the years with this current plan to put the retail and commercial core at the center of the project. It might look like a long distance on the page in 2 dimensions, but if you actually look at it, especially now that the site is grading and clearing and infrastructure is going in, you can see it's not as big as you think. Like 400 acres is not that big when everything is connected by the roadways and the pathways that we're proposing in the project. We do have a pretty significant multifamily component that's going to be part of a future DSP that's coming soon. I don't know if you can speak to when.
It's hopefully going to be coming in this month.
So Scott Rauch from Chesapeake Realty Partners is going to be overseeing that part of the development as well. And so that'll be coming in this month. And we expect that the first phase of commercial will come in this month as well. I think as the mayor mentioned, and as all of you have heard and expressed before, we're really focused on getting quality retail, especially a grocery store there. And we're working on ironing out some of those details that will allow us to move forward with that. Once all those plans are in place, I think you'll get a much clearer picture of how everything will come together there. And I think to your point about even more dense mixed use, which I think a lot of people think of like apartments above the retail stores and things of that nature, those are all things that we're open to in the future. As it stands right now, as you know, we are subject to pretty stringent density caps. And we have to build what is buildable now based on those restrictions. At some point in the future, if it becomes feasible to do some of the more multi-story development scheme, we'll be happy to come back before you and present that. And it sounds like that would be a favorable
Let me
thing.
jump in here, if you don't mind, Councilman, just one quick second here. I think one of the things that you need to understand, and I think you've heard from a number of people in here this evening, are issues that just don't seem to be resolved yet, to our understanding. And Councilman, I appreciate you taking a moment to let me do this. From the schools, we heard that, future residents and we don't know where they're going to go to middle school. We're talking about, will it be at Pointer Ridge or where they'll be? And I know you're saying that's not issues that you have control over, but it's issues that involve our community and our kids and the impact. You talked about, Liberty Sports Park and how that's associated and affected with that. But what is the real impact of that on a development project there? We talked about the tax incremental funding, what we're doing with that. But what is that impact going to do to us, even though we're supporting that? But what is the actual impact of other projects and other things that we could have been doing as part of the city? One of the things we talked about, and you've heard over and over, and I think as the councilman was just saying, we're talking about moving forward with developing the homes, but we have yet to have heard any single commitment from any retail there. One of the issues, and I appreciate the comments from our citizens in saying, no, it didn't just go that far, but a part of it that I was told was about a food desert. But it doesn't help me to move forward if I don't hear where you're going to address a food store that hasn't been committed there. And we could go on and on. We can talk about, as we've talked about, how are we going to have transportation? There was some talk, I believe, about bus service to Largo Station, but where is that? We haven't heard how that's built out. And I understand the process in the past may have been to take it step by step, but I think you're hearing from this community and from this council that we need a lot more answers up front. We need those commitments. It's like a report card. If you don't know what the classes are, it's hard to grade it. And one thing I always say is if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And so we need to measure where you are so we can help to manage that from our perspective. So as we go on, and we can talk about environmental issues and all, because I would have to ask, what happened to the trees? I mean, but understand, I am not a developer. I haven't worked with developers. I'm learning a lot now. But it seems like everything was stripped. And I'm trying to figure out what happened. And if you could, I know you want to answer the trees. Go right ahead.
Well, again, let me just first say on behalf of the developers that we are not unsympathetic to or unempathetic to what we've heard, not only this evening but previously. In the community. So we hear all that and we understand that. So, but one of the things that I want to point out about the trees is that the green space for the proposal that we have is the same as we had for Carrington back in 2004. We actually have more green space in this one. So one of the things that there's a bigger issue globally when it comes to retail as far as what's really happening with retail. Everybody knows that, you see it just this past weekend on Black Friday and what's happening with people shopping online instead of going to a large, the days of the 100,000 square foot store could be over for now. So it's important to realize that you have to be flexible when it comes to that retail. But that retail has to be on 301 so you can see what's going on. I mean, anybody who wants to come and have retail, they're going to want to be visible. So I think that's important. But I do want to say that everything we heard here is very important, and we agree with what you have been stating up here. These are important concepts and stuff. Well, I wanted them I have to bring it back to where we are. We're here to discuss a detailed site plan for these units. That's what the case is all about. And though every issue that has been brought up is important, there are phases when these issues are addressed. We're not saying you can vote any way you want to vote, but your vote legally should be tied to the detailed site plan. That's what we're here for. And then the detailed site plan is, just this is just what we're here for. And again, those issues when it comes to Bowie plan, city planning, and your staff report says this is a mixed-use site. Your own plan calls for it to be mixed-use here. And so that's what we're saying. And again, we're not being unsympathetic to what's being here because
I understand what you're saying, but what I'm trying to make sure that we convey is that as we move forward, we really want to make sure that we work. We're not trying to vilify developers, don't get me wrong, but we do want to have a sense of accountability as to where we are. So as you talk about the site plan, and as it moves forward, we also need to understand that every step we take is another step towards the completion of the project.
Right.
And so we need to make sure that we have to look in totality at where we are. So again, I want to say that for the record, we're not trying to vilify you or any other developer. That's not our place. There is a role for development to help us as we move along. But where we are right now is just making sure that we make sure you hear what the concerns are and make sure you understand. That's how we move the process. For us, it's a little different in the sense of we want to be held to the same guidance, guidelines, the ordinance, and we really want to do that. But we also need to make sure we understand what the citizens want and where they are. And we want to make sure that you get that as well.
I completely understand.
And that's where we are.
And one of the rationales for the annexation that was stated is because I think it was Mr. Garner was saying, we get all the issues associated with it, but we don't have any input. So one of the reasons why they talked about annexation is because we want to have a camaraderie with the city of Bowie and work with you on that. That's where we got to. That's why we have that annexation, because this property was not in the city of Bowie. And so that's that. So we're here to commit to continue to work with you on this project. Okay, I don't want to speak for you, so I'm sorry. But I remember you saying that.
Yes. And so at this point,
Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead.
I have a couple additional follow-up questions, if I may. The condo units, the 2/2s, are those all wood structure?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Senior units, anything in there in senior that we have that are guaranteed committed to for senior?
No, not guaranteed. The city, as you might recall, last year passed an additional covenant on the project that requires us to come back to the city specifically with that as a new proposal, and it would be treated as a new case. So we don't have anything locked in with regard to that right now, but that's one of the many things that we're considering in one of the future plans.
So there's nothing in the in this area, so that kind of limits where the senior components could be there.
It would be a higher density type construction, like multi-story type building is what we envision, and we've identified a couple of locations on the site that would be good for that. But again, it wasn't. We asked for it, but the council decided to kind of exclude that from what had already been approved and require us to come back with a new plan on that. So we'll be doing that.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned because senior housing to me does not to me mean that it's always high density.
Sure.
And
So,
there are there other alternatives and other formats.
To speak to that, excuse me, I think as Nat had pointed out earlier, talking about some of the residential architecture, there are several single-family units that are shown that are included in this detailed site plan that accommodate age in place with first-floor master bedrooms and also have the ability to accommodate people with differing needs as they live in the house.
But those don't necessarily have anything in the realm of a condo type arrangement where owners of such a unit would be free of the burdens of mowing the lawn and that kind of stuff.
It's a typical arrangement now that even in single family and townhouses, the HOA does actually take on all of that exterior maintenance type stuff.
Yes, it does.
All right.
I will say, based on my recent experience with neighborhoods, including, by the way, the Hall Station development, I had the pleasure of working with some of the people in this room to get that done. And in that development, the HOA does take care of the exterior maintenance for all the residential units, both the condos and the townhouses.
I'm sorry, the condos
And the townhouses.
and the townhouses, but not the you're speaking?
That project only has condos and townhouses in it.
Okay. All right. So that's, again, back to the higher density usage.
Yeah, but same principle applies for projects that have singles now, new projects. We just don't have any singles at Hall Station.
All right, thank you.
He just told me he would do.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Hello? Hi. I've got a couple questions. For the sake of not keeping us here all night, I'll ask my questions, and if you want to get the information to us later or whatever that looks like, yeah, that could work too. So you kind of talked about a little bit about the commercial stores planned for the development and how they're not planned for the first part of the development. And you mentioned a little bit of, you're shaking your head. Do you want to respond?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I would like to clarify that they are going to be coming along soon. That plan will be coming along soon.
What exactly does soon mean?
I would expect within the next month as well.
In terms of the commitment, or what do you mean?
In terms of the detailed site plan for the commercial.
Okay, so you're saying that the detailed site plan for the commercial spaces, in terms of who will be occupying those spaces, will be coming in 1 month?
It will not necessarily include the names for all the spaces. It will include architecture for the building and building layouts, and it will be tailored specifically to the major anchor grocery store that we are working towards. And forgive me, I'm not trying to be coy or misleading. This is just kind of how it goes in the development world, and especially now with retail being a very challenging market segment. So we can't disclose the names of the stores that we're working with before the deals are totally
Is there a law that says you can't disclose that? I'm just trying to understand.
It's a standard term of negotiations with retailers now.
Okay, that you can't, and could you ask them if you could disclose that their names?
The ones that we're working with now have made it clear they don't want the names disclosed until the deals are finalized.
Okay, so the difficulty and how that makes that difficult for us in the community is that we don't essentially understand or know what type of stores will be coming here to even be involved in that process, or to even be able to advise or recommend or
You absolutely can advise and recommend. We love suggestions. We take suggestions very seriously. The Michael Companies has been in business in Prince George's County for almost 50 years now. We own several other existing shopping centers that I would say are among the best in the county, if not the best. We always strive to have top quality retailers that also complement each other, so that you don't have the issues of stores cannibalizing and vacant spaces. And I'm just pointing to our company's track record in that area.
I understand that, but I'm just pointing to the surroundings of Bowie as a city. It doesn't look like that. So I understand where you're saying that your company is, has these accolades and things of that sort. Bowie doesn't necessarily reflect that. So it's very hard to, kind of presume that that's exactly what's going to happen.
We did do Hall Station, but otherwise we don't have any retail developments in the city that I can point to. So we have Ritchie Station Marketplace, College Park Marketplace, Vista Gardens Marketplace, elsewhere in the county, and we did do Hall Station, although that was a relatively small retail component.
Okay, so exactly when will this retail be coming? In terms of the names,
in
but
terms
the
of
actual
construction?
Yes.
So the site construction that you can see now also will touch on the commercial area, and it's our intention to be delivering the first retail spaces coincident with the first residential spaces. So that would probably be in the earlier part of 2021. Time flies.
So could you speak in layman's terms for me? Does that mean that it's going to be included with the first set of residential building that's going to happen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Also, we talked a lot about education tonight in terms of, kind of just how residents feel about the educational infrastructure and the money that, you set aside, and obviously that not coming back to the city of Bowie. So is there a situation in which you'd be willing to set aside a portion of that would go directly to Bowie, as opposed to it going to an educational fund that essentially doesn't come back to us?
I'm going to give you a layman's answer, and Arthur might need to hit me and give a more proper answer. But the answer is that we can't direct those funds at all.
No, I'm not asking you to direct those funds.
We're certainly willing, as I think the mayor had indicated he would expect, we are certainly willing to work with the city or with anybody that you designate to go to the county and present that present?
I don't
that
think you're
to us?
answering my question.
Okay,
I didn't ask for you to redirect those specific funds because, obviously that would be immoral, but what I'm asking is, would you be able to set aside, like, we're not talking about those funds, like, we're talking about whatever else you have in the bank, would you be able to set aside money that would, be allocated towards, setting aside a property for a school or something of that sort?
Well, we absolutely understand your question, and the problem that we have, and we all love this county, but the cost is already exorbitant. Besides the expense that you have for the school system, again, $16,000 per unit, that's plus that, and it escalates every year. So by the time these houses are built, it'll be over $17,000. And then you have public safety surcharges, it's almost about the same. So for these units to be built, you're already starting off having, I guess somebody testified earlier that we didn't say what the home prices would be, but that's not correct, because he stepped, at that night meeting we were here, he said that these townhouses are going to start, at the lowest would be the low 300s, and then in the senior, for the 2over2s, and then, it goes up from there. So these are not inexpensive houses, and then also, just the cost, so.
I apologize. I understand your question better. I misunderstood before. In terms of setting aside funds, I think Arthur touched on it earlier in his presentation. Developers actually set aside and contributed $250,000 well in advance of any construction or any final approvals related to the project to free up classroom capacity in a school that's located in the city of Bowie. So this developer and these project owners have demonstrated that commitment and taken affirmative action, including cutting checks to make that a reality. And I don't know of any developer in the county that's done that.
Mr. Mayor, I had one quick question. Joe, do you know when the county is expecting to hear this DSP before them?
I don't believe there's a time frame set yet because it has not been accepted for processing.
Okay. For the sake of time, I'll say a few words and then move on. What is very clear is that the community doesn't feel like they were involved in this. This has been a thing that's been going on for a couple years now, several years now, a decade, starting as Carrington and now as South Lake. And I'm sort of disappointed that our folks are here and feel like they haven't been heard. So, with that being said, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to postpone the South Lake detailed site plan to our January meeting.
I'm sorry, what was that date, Mayor Pro Tem? What was the postponement date?
To one of our January meetings.
Okay, I think we have to name a specific meeting tonight, if I'm not mistaken.
Can we do the 21st?
All right, then I second the motion to postpone until January 21.
Discussion?
I want to ask if we could, I'm okay with the motion, but I want to ask if we could push it in February. We have a couple items that are pretty heavy in January. Heavy. We have Amber Ridge in January, gentlemen and ladies.
I'd like to restate my motion. I'd like to make a motion to postpone the South Lake detailed site plan to our first February meeting.
Seconded.
To when? What was the date?
First February meeting.
First February meeting?
Yes.
Can we get a date on that as it stands now?
February 3rd.
February 3rd? Mm-hmm. Okay, it's been moved and properly second that we postpone approving the detailed site plan DSP 19023 for South Lake until the February 3rd meeting.
Mayor, I'm sorry, we're postponing our decision, not approval, correct?
Correct.
Okay, just restate.
Okay, so to restate that, we are delaying our...
All in favor?
Wait. It's been moved and properly second that we delay our decision on site plan DSP 19023 South Lake until the February 3rd meeting. Any discussion? If not, I call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So it has been Moved properly second and affirmed to delay the site plan decision until February 3rd.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I move to adjournment and move to closed session.
Second.
Statutory authority to close session, general provisions article subsection 3-305B7, to consult with the council to obtain legal advice, and subsection 3-305B14. Before a contract is awarded or bids are open, to discuss a matter directly related to a negotiation strategy or the contents of a bid or a proposal. If public discussion or disclosure would adversely impact the ability of the public body to participate in the competitive bidding process and proposal.
Second.
It's been moved and properly second that we adjourn the closed session. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? There be none.
Wilder was watching too.